Or are there things that haven't worked out as you'd hoped in terms of the evidence industry in Australia?
There is still a tendency to say, just give me the money and leave me alone. And certainly in the politic, that is unacceptable, particularly given the accountability has come and stayed, for good or bad. And so at the moment, we are still looking for shiny baubles. We're still particularly in Australia with the school choice debate so high, we're into massive branding and competition. And in many times, evidence goes out the window when you have that kind of branding. So there's a massive conflict out there between the incredible amount of evidence we have, which we selectively pick to advertise, and the evidence we need to truly make a difference to what happens in the classroom.
I think that's a really important point. So is this industry going to be able to pick up your concerns?
I struggle because one of the other problems is that evidence is should be a very contested word. Like every teacher has 10 to 20 years of evidence based on their experience, and we should not deny that as evidence. It is evidence. It's like data and numbers. That's evidence. What matters is our biases, our interpretations of our experience or of the other evidence, and that is not highlighted. So much is how do we build piles and piles of more data and evidence, and I think that will swamp us. It'll create a massive industry, and sooner or later we'll blame the schools for not using it, but I think it misses the point. It's how do we help teachers and school leaders to be more evaluative interpreters of this information. Mrs. Google has provided so much data. It is the interpretation of that data on Mrs. Google that matters. Same with evidence.
So what's going to happen in the future then in terms of governments and education and all the other players in the game using evidence? What's your crystal ball?
Well, I would like to see us get smarter about doing more comparative studies. Why do we do this rather than that, as opposed to let's put an intervention and see if it works or it doesn't work. There are many, many interventions in education. Quite a few of them are not related to the actual diagnosis of what's happening in the school. So evidence about diagnosis, I think, is just as important about evidence about interventions. I don't think we're as good at implementation. Evidence about fidelity and dosage of implementation, and obviously evidence at the end about the evaluation of what happens. Those are four: the diagnosis, the interventions, the implementation, the evaluation, all require evidence of different kinds, all require massive evaluation. I want school people to be evaluators more than they are researchers, and that evaluation asks, so what? And that's the key question.
And is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think it's a very exciting time for evidence, provided we see it as contested, provided we see it as the interpretation. It's wonderful that we are introducing this, and there are so many schools I work in that are stunningly good at using their evidence to look at diagnosis. I visited one just this last week where the young students in primary schools were looking at the evidence based on the school data and being involved in helping interpret it from their perspective. I think it's a very, very healthy move. As long as we don't keep adding to the pile, but we actually start to have more bloodhound-like eyes sifting through and understanding what it means to the learning lives of kids, it's a very healthy move.
But aren't there two issues around that? There's the time for teachers to actually learn to interpret the evidence, and then how to share it with others.
Well, yes, but time isn't really the issue. It's priority. And many of the schools now that are very good at interpreting the evidence in front of them, they have the same time as those that don't. So they've chosen to give up some things to have this as a priority. But the other half of what you ask, sharing, that's a really hard part. Like collective efficacy, working together, it is not easy, but that's where great school leaders can make the difference, to reduce the whiff of accountability, to enhance the trust so that you can actually look and ask the tough questions about what worked, what didn't work, what we need to do next.
So you're suggesting governments should leave it up to the schools?
I think they should be empowering the schools to do it. Yes, absolutely, because that's where it makes the difference to kids. I certainly think governments should be doing it to themselves. They should be continually evaluating their own. And I think that would be a very healthy move if we could have an independent evaluation in government of the whole system of what they do, because they should not be immune from this whole debate.
And who would do the independent evaluation?
Well, there are some examples. There is an example in New South Wales of CESI that is doing this as a quasi-independent government board. There are examples in other countries of evaluator generals that are starting to do this. My biggest worry, though, is it'll turn into a debate about method. like random control trials will be the answer. They are not the gold standard. Beyond reasonable doubt is the gold standard. There are many random control studies that are terrible. And so I'm disappointed if that's where they go. And that would be my fear. Now, one of my worries at the moment is that if you look at the Education Endowment Fund and you look at the similar organisation in America, there's 140 odd different random control trials they've done in the last few years. 140 odd. On average, because they sift in terms of quality of studies, each of them is based on 2 articles. And the average effect size of those 141 random control studies is 0.03. So if you choose, as in the US you are forced to choose, if you are to choose for one of those random controls, you must choose one based on very limited evidence that doesn't work. I think that's a serious problem when we put method above beyond reasonable doubt.
Thank you, John Hattie.
Thank you.